Arthur Schopenhauer didn't just believe that solitude was a consequence of intelligence. He saw it as a necessity. According to him, the deeper someone thinks, the more disconnected they become from the ordinary concerns of everyday people. Let's be honest. How often do you feel frustrated by shallow conversations? The endless small talk about the weather, the latest celebrity drama, or the newest TikTok trend? Now imagine being someone like Isaac Newton, whose mind was consumed by the laws of the universe, while people around him discussed the latest fashion trends. Schopenhauer believed that this kind of intellectual gap creates a natural barrier between a genius and society. The more you elevate your thinking, the harder it becomes to relate to the world around you. And it's not just an abstract idea. It's a reality that's played out throughout history. Nikola Tesla avoided social interactions, believing they were a waste of time that interfered with his research. Albert Einstein openly admitted that he preferred solitude over the company of those who weren't interested in deep intellectual discussions. Emily Dickinson lived almost her entire life in isolation, writing poetry that would only be appreciated long after her death. For these minds, solitude wasn't a choice. It was the only way to truly exist. But here's the twist. Schopenhauer wasn't blind to the downside of this. He understood that solitude can be both a refuge and a burden. Because when you detach from society, you also detach from human connection. And that can lead to something darker, alienation. Schopenhauer's philosophy wasn't just about celebrating solitude. It was about recognizing its double-edged nature. On one hand, isolation allows for deep thought, creativity, and intellectual freedom. But on the other, it can lead to loneliness, depression, and a sense of being disconnected from the world. And history proves this over and over again. Friedrich Nietzsche, despite valuing solitude, suffered from extreme loneliness and mental illness later in life. Tesla, despite his brilliance, died alone and nearly forgotten. Newton, known for his genius, was also infamous for his impatience and inability to form close relationships. Schopenhauer believed that genius comes at a cost, and that cost is often isolation. But does that mean that all intelligent people are doomed to a life of loneliness? Or is there a way to exist in society without losing your intellectual depth? That's where Schopenhauer had a solution: detachment. And this is where things get really interesting. Schopenhauer had a brutal understanding of human nature. To him, society wasn't a place for genuine intellectual exchange. It was a stage where people performed, hiding their true thoughts behind carefully constructed masks. He saw the world as a constant theater of deception, where people weren't truly interested in truth, but rather in status, validation, and meaningless distractions. So what was his solution? Detachment. Instead of trying to fit into a world obsessed with trivialities, Schopenhauer suggested something different. Observe society without being consumed by it. Engage with the world strategically, without emotional attachment. Interact with people only when necessary, but never rely on them for happiness. He believed that true freedom comes from self-sufficiency. Happiness belongs to those who are self-sufficient. And that's exactly what many great minds have done throughout history. Instead of forcing themselves into social circles where they didn't belong, they focused on what truly mattered to them: their work, their ideas, and their creations. This is where we see a connection between Schopenhauer's ideas and another powerful philosophy, Stoicism. The Stoics, much like Schopenhauer, believed that the key to a meaningful life wasn't found in social validation, but in inner peace. One of the most famous Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, wrote, "Give yourself a gift, the gift of indifference to what is beyond your control." And this applies perfectly to the modern world. Think about it. How much of your mental energy is wasted on things that don't really matter? The pressure to keep up with trends, the need for social approval, the endless cycle of gossip, drama, and superficiality. Schopenhauer believed that intelligent people should free themselves from this noise, not by completely isolating themselves, but by learning how to filter what truly matters. And this leads us to a crucial question. If you have a mind that craves deep thought, meaningful conversations, and intellectual stimulation, how do you survive in a world that thrives on the opposite? Schopenhauer's answer was clear. Accept that most people won't understand you. Trying to fit in where you don't belong is a waste of time. Limit your social interactions, quality over quantity. Choose who you interact with carefully. Become an observer, not a participant. Learn to navigate social situations without getting emotionally involved. Focus on your inner world. Your thoughts, creativity, and intellectual pursuits matter more than external validation. This is not about arrogance. It's about protecting your mind from the distractions of mediocrity. And Schopenhauer believed that this was the only way to preserve one's intellectual freedom. But here's the real question. Some say that loneliness is a sign of failure, that a life without constant social interaction is a life unfulfilled. But Schopenhauer saw it differently. To him, solitude was a privilege, not a punishment. The common man cannot bear solitude because he only feels comfortable in the company of others. The superior man seeks solitude because in it he finds himself. And this idea is still relevant today. Look at the world we live in. A society addicted to distractions, where people fear being alone with their own thoughts. But for those who embrace solitude, there is something incredibly powerful: clarity. It is in solitude that great ideas are born. It is in solitude that geniuses create. It is in solitude that true freedom exists. Does this mean you should cut yourself off from the world? Even Schopenhauer admitted that some level of interaction is necessary, but it does mean that solitude should never be seen as a weakness. So, the real question is, are you willing to embrace your solitude as a source of strength? Because if you've made it this far, you already know the answer. And here's where things get even deeper. Most people believe that being socially active equals happiness, but is that really true? Schopenhauer had a radical take on this. He argued that what we call social fulfillment is often nothing more than a distraction from deeper existential truths. Think about it. How many conversations actually add meaning to your life? How many relationships are built on genuine understanding rather than convenience? According to Schopenhauer, most human interactions are based on ego and self-interest. People engage with others not out of genuine connection, but to boost their own status or fulfill personal needs. Fear of loneliness. Many seek company not because they enjoy it, but because they are terrified of being alone. Shallow entertainment. Socializing often revolves around gossip, trends, and trivial topics that add little to intellectual or personal growth. He wasn't saying that all social interactions are meaningless, but he did believe that true depth is rare, and that those with an exceptional mind will always struggle to find people who think like them. This is why so many great thinkers throughout history have chosen isolation, not because they hated people, but because they valued their time and mental energy. Which brings us to the next question. The modern world teaches us to fear loneliness. We are constantly connected: social media, notifications, never-ending conversations. But have you ever stopped to ask yourself, are all these connections actually fulfilling? Schopenhauer believed that most people confuse being surrounded by others with being truly understood. Because what's worse than being alone? Being surrounded by people who don't truly understand you. This is the paradox of intelligence. The brighter your mind, the fewer people you find who resonate with you. And this is why many of history's greatest minds chose solitude over superficial connection. Emily Dickinson stayed in her house for most of her life, dedicating herself completely to poetry. Beethoven, as he lost his hearing, withdrew from the world and created his greatest works in isolation. Buddha himself abandoned the world to seek enlightenment through solitude and meditation. For Schopenhauer, these were not tragic figures. They were people who found true freedom. Because solitude, when embraced, is not loneliness. It's liberation. But here's where things get interesting. If you've ever felt disconnected from the people around you, Schopenhauer would say, that's a good sign. To him, the world is divided into two types of people. The majority, who are content with the superficial. The rare few, who seek deeper meaning. The problem? The majority will always try to pull the minority back into their world of distractions. Schopenhauer wrote, mediocrity only recognizes itself. Genius sees both itself and mediocrity, and finds itself alone. This is why intelligent, deep-thinking individuals often feel frustrated with society, not because they think they're better than others, but because they see the world differently. While others chase validation, they seek understanding. While others chase entertainment, they seek knowledge. While others chase distractions, they seek truth. And this difference creates an inevitable gap between the two worlds. So what should the intelligent person do? This leads us to one of Schopenhauer's most practical ideas, the balance between engagement and withdrawal. If society is shallow, should you completely isolate yourself? Not necessarily. Even Schopenhauer admitted that complete isolation isn't ideal. Instead, he suggested something else, strategic detachment. This means choosing carefully who you interact with. Seek meaningful conversations, not just noise. Avoiding unnecessary social obligations. Don't engage in empty interactions just for the sake of it. Maintaining inner independence. Even if you participate in society, don't let it dictate your thoughts or values. This is how many great minds throughout history have balanced intellectual solitude and social survival. And in today's world, where distractions are everywhere, this strategy is more relevant than ever. Because here's the truth. Most of what happens in society isn't worth your attention. Most conversations won't expand your mind. Most interactions won't bring you closer to truth. And realizing this isn't arrogance, it's clarity, which leads us to the final and most important question. At this point, you might be wondering, what should I do with this knowledge? Schopenhauer's answer was simple. You have two choices in life. Adapt to society, try to fit in, engage in shallow conversations, and follow the crowd. Accept your solitude. Embrace your intellectual independence and stop seeking validation from the world. Most people choose the first option, but those who choose the second unlock true freedom. Because in solitude, you are not bound by social expectations. You are not distracted by meaningless conversations. You are not consumed by the need for approval. You are simply yourself, and that, according to Schopenhauer, is the ultimate privilege. So now I ask you, do you fear solitude, or do you see it as a gateway to something greater? If this video made you think, then you already know the answer. And if you're ready for an even deeper dive into the minds of history's greatest thinkers, I have 2 more videos that will challenge everything you thought you knew. Click at your own risk.